This is the Village of North Bennington regular trustees meeting for June the 9th of 2020. We're meeting by Zoom today, and we're having a virtual meeting. We're not having a in-person location, but we have provided notice, and under the amendments to the governor's emergency order, we are permitted to meet virtually as long as we provide proper notice, which we believe we have. And so we're going to proceed as a regular meeting tonight, and we do have a quorum. I'll introduce myself. I'm John Lamson. I'm the chair of the trustees. Matthew Patterson is not with us. Oh, yes, he is with us. There's just no image, it seems like, but
Getting there.
Oh, you are here. Okay, thank you for confirming that. So Matthew Patterson is the vice chair. We also have Aaron McKinney. We have Mark Bro and Tara Lowry. Right there. Okay, great. Just want to orient myself here. And we also have our road foreman, Norm LeBlanc, with us tonight. Thank you for joining us. And we have our secretary, Laureen Elwell, and Mary Rogers, our treasurer. So, and that's the officials here today. And I'm sure that I'll just ask that if you have a comment or you're going to speak to a particular issue, just introduce yourself when the issue comes up that you're here to discuss. So with that, we'll take a look at the agenda, which I do have here somewhere. June the 9th, there we go. Okay. And I meant to say, if anybody's having any connection issues, please let me know in some way. This is a public meeting, so you're allowed to interrupt by either raising your hand or taking yourself off of mute and just speaking up. We don't want anybody to feel like they're excluded from the discussion in any way. So just make sure and let me know if there's something that you need that you'd like to speak to. And I don't think we have to be to the letter of formality, but because especially on the communication tower issue, if you would just try, I know it's a little awkward sometimes, but just try to address your comments to me, the chair, and that way it doesn't get personal between parties. If you address comments to the chair, I'll ask the representatives to do the same. So that way there aren't any direct comments aren't directed toward each other. So the first order of business is to review and approve the minutes from Tuesday, May 12th, 2020. That meeting was also by Zoom, by electronic means. So did the trustees have a chance to review the minutes from the 12th, May 12th? I see nods. Okay. Yes. And is there any objection to the approval of the minutes? No. Okay. So, and this is, I think once the discussion's over, we might take a look at adopting the Vermont League of Cities and Towns model rules for procedure. Right now we have I believe that the village has adopted Robert's rules at this point, but even the Robert's rules recognizes that meetings like this don't need to follow the same kind of formality that larger meetings do. And so as I can see, there is no objection to the minutes. We'll approve the minutes will be indicated as approved by unanimous consent. And we'll move to the warrant and payment of the bills. And did the trustees have an opportunity to review the warrant? There are the expenses and there's also the payroll. So let's start with the payroll warrant, and that was, there were no additional expenses for payroll other than our 2 employees and Mary and Lori as treasurer and secretary. So the total is $8,189.95. Is there any objection to approval of the? Tara?
Second.
Oh, you're making a motion, Tara, to approve? Okay, there's a motion and a second. Is there any objection or discussion? Hearing none, that motion carries unanimously. Okay, and we had the, okay, I have budget versus actuals and cash balances. I'm not sure if I'm seeing the expense warrant.
I think you need to just scroll over. There's some other attachments.
Okay, there's
You
one.
get to it.
Let's see.
That one's an Excel document, John.
That's why. Yep, I was just looking through my PDFs, and that one is an Excel document. All right. Sorry. And I can actually, if people want to take a look at that, I guess there's no harm in doing that. It's probably good form. I will go ahead and share that. Here's the warrant for this month. Probably, if you can see it. I don't know if I can make it bigger. That would be in the amount of $23,276.91. Any questions on the warrant for this month? Go ahead and speak up if you have a question, because I can't, when I'm doing the shared screen, I can't see all the trustees in my view.
Looks good.
Okay. Passive is insurance. There's a payment on our vehicle. That's Wacker Newson. How about the Green Mountain Power expense? Is that for more than 1 month, Mary?
It's probably all the bills combined.
Or is that for that? That's not the, okay, yeah.
No, that's for all 7 of the bills
Yeah.
that you get.
I see. Okay, right. Okay. So is there a motion to accept the warrant
I'll make that motion.
by Mr. Boudreau
I'll
and
second it.
Aaron seconds? And is there any objection or discussion on the motion? Okay, without objection, that motion passes unanimously. Okay. And the next order of business. Mary, are there other approvals that we need to do before moving on to the next agenda item?
There are none.
Okay. Then we can move to citizen comments at this time. And this would be, there is an agenda item specifically with regard to the cell phone communication tower. So this would be any citizen comments that are not related to the communication tower. Ms. Kincaid, I did not have your item as a specific agenda item. So would you like to raise an issue with the board tonight?
Yes, please, if I may.
And could I summarize our discussion, or would you like to?
No, you go ahead and explain what I have said to you.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
Sure. And so we've had a couple of phone calls earlier. Well, over the last 2 weeks, I think, is when I first heard of this issue. But this is a concern about use of property on the location is actually on Mechanic Street. Ms. Kincaid lives on College Road, but has adjoining property on the backside with the property on Mechanic Street, which I think because they're not present, I don't need to say who the property owner is, but the substance of the complaint is that the all-terrain vehicles or motorcycles or whatever they are operating at levels of sound that are above what could be considered to be reasonable. And so I have taken a look at, the way that we pass ordinances here, as the trustees know, is that, through our course of business, we would pass an ordinance and then it would be part of the record. And we'd have to go back and find the ordinance in order to figure out what it said or what we adopted. The town of Bennington has their ordinances posted on the website, which obviously would be in our best interest to do that as soon as we are operating a website, and we'll do that. But their ordinance is very detailed and pretty specific about when you can make loud noises and how loud the noises can be. And the standard that they use is 70 decibels, which and there are certain hours of the day, but it's essentially that you can operate machinery and do louder things during the daytime hours, but not at night. It's kind of like I don't remember exactly, but it's something like between 9 and 5 or something like that. And so I think the substance of what Ms. Kincaid was saying was that she would like that type of standard to apply in North Bennington and feels that's reasonable, and would like the trustees to address that. She has already attempted to negotiate with the property owner, but that has not worked out.
No, in fact, the wife was hostile and incredibly rude, and which I found odd, because it's not an attitude that I'm used to having here. I've lived in this house since 1991. Mrs. Ho used to be my neighbor, and we had very good relations. She would, in those days, you'd have actual snow, so she would go cross-country skiing and would pass through the property. And so it was very strange to have new people who seemed incredibly rude and unneighborly, but that's fine. It is what it is, as they say. But they seem suddenly to have these boys, and with these, I think you call them ATV vehicles, little, it's not, what are they called? They
I think that's right.
ATV. Okay, I don't know what the ATV stands for, by the way. Anyway, there's a field adjoining our property. I think it's their field, but somehow it's ceded to North Bennington. I don't really understand the arrangement. They cannot develop it, but they've turned it into a kind of raceway. And the boys will go up and down, and for some peculiar reason, they start to do it just as you would wish to sit on the porch and have a drink or do whatever it is you do as the sun sets, And it just goes on and on. So I tried reasoning not reasoning. I spoke to the father. There's a lot of activity in that part of their yard, and as you said, it adjoins ours, and they seem to get closer and closer to my property. They have animals and so on, and I think, well, it's very bucolic or something. That's all fine. I've never complained about that, but suddenly these parties of little, they're not so little, and they shout so loud that they sometimes are louder than the vehicles. They seem to be playing some kind of war game, and it just goes on and on for hours, and it seems unreasonable. It's sort of, I was telling one of my friends in the village about it, and he said, oh God, that would drive me crazy. And it does actually drive you crazy. And you get all sorts of unkind thoughts about children, which you don't want to have, but it's just so crazy. It's very unpleasant. Then, on top of that, the caretaker lives in a cottage right next to the field, and he often, retreats early. He can't fall asleep because it goes on and on the longer the days are. And I just wondered what the rules are about this, or I mean, I don't want to have to call somebody in Montpelier to find out what my options are, and I also don't want to have a quarrel with my neighbors. But it seems to me that they are doing something that is unacceptable and unneighborly. So I thought I would come to the board for some relief.
Any of the trustees have a comment on that? Is there?
No?
Oh, hold on just a second, Tara. Wait for this sound isn't coming through for some reason.
Not hearing it.
There's a gentleman. Matthew?
So I think that I feel your concern, Jamaica, and it's kind of up to the current zoning that we do have, and have our zoning administrator speak to that. I know there's been other issues on the same hill in the past. I really don't know what we can do immediately, but I think John is speaking to the issue of adopting a similar policy to Bennington. I'm not sure that once again, in the past where we've dealt with this with motorcycles, that decibel limit stuff is not really very easy to measure, and something something below the trigger level in terms of decibel can also be quite annoying over time. So I don't know where we're at with that, and with whether Chris Damon has been contacted about this or not.
Is that his name? I don't even know their names. They're incredibly.
No, he's talking. Matthew's talking about our zoning administrator.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry.
I don't think he has been notified about this.
I see.
So we can certainly look to see if there is an existing violation of zoning, but I think the noise might fall more under an ordinance, and I think it's not very good policy to just try to develop an ordinance each time an issue comes up. I think we should be going back to and trying to organize the ordinances that we do have and make sure that we know what we have and
Mhm.
and
I'm sorry, am I interrupting someone?
no, you can go ahead.
The brief conversation, well, actually, it was a hostile conversation I had with the mother. She seemed very confident that I would be dismissed. Is that my complaint? You know, I said, well, I really have to take this to the board, and she, you know, I think waved me away in a rather contemptuous way, I must say. So she, I don't know if she knows these rules. I think believe she grew up here, so as I say, she seemed very confident that I would get nowhere.
Well, it sounds like, unfortunately, I'm not sure why Tara is having a connection issue, but maybe if you want to sign out and back in. But she said that she has read the our current bylaws in a conservation district to have a 70 decibel limit, which if you're either in the conservation district or those can be applied more broadly, that would certainly be something that the zoning administrator could already enforce. But it's, I think, is it the general consensus of the trustees that we would generally want to be enforcing existing ordinances as opposed to like sending a letter, for instance, just saying that we felt that this was unreasonable in general as opposed to it violating a specific ordinance?
Well, the concern in the past has been that when that has come up, the Bennington police have, I believe, you know, come to try to measure the you know, the decibel level at property line or whatever, and you know, it never seems to you know, 70 decibels is pretty loud. And if you put a couple 100 feet between the noise and you, you know, I don't think we've had any success with that in the past. You know, I don't know if there's other means to regulate activity on a property that kind of comes at it from something other than the noise itself. Probably not. So.
But are you allowed to have those vehicles in a village?
Yes.
You are?
Yes.
Yeah, there wouldn't be a restriction on those. I mean, some
I mean, not to just have them in your yard, but to ride around on your motorcycle in your yard, and it would be at a full throttle. Is that something that's allowed?
I think if you have a yard big enough to ride it on, that there isn't a restriction as to how, you know, how you do that. But it, you know, there are sound limits, and I think it's, you know, what we're saying is that's not if you put an ordinance in place that says 70 decibels, that it should be enforced. You shouldn't just write it down and then never, you know, and then it doesn't mean anything. I mean, it should, but I think that Matthew's saying that there are problems with that because, you know, when it gets measured and how it gets measured, then
Yes.
And there's
Sorry, I'm sorry, please.
there's duration in a lot of those ordinances. how long does it go on? We've dealt with multiple dog situations not too far from your house where
Yes,
dogs will bark
yes,
incessantly.
I didn't
I'm sure
complain
you've
about,
experienced that. Yeah.
I remember that.
And, you know, it never comes to anything because it can't be demonstrated that it's you know, that whether the length of time, I think with something like a motorcycle or an ATV, that noise is more constant, incessant.
Mm,
So it's been
Is there, are there ordinance? I'm so sorry.
dealing with
Go ahead, Jamaica.
Well, I was going to ask if there were ordinances about the way you could enjoy the place you live in. Are they allowed to cause me discomfort in my home?
That, well,
They
that question that sounds a little more like a legal question to me. I mean, that, you know, what you can come to the trustees for is if there's an ordinance in place or if there's a zoning bylaw in place, you can ask that the municipality enforce what they've put in place.
I see.
Whether somebody is imposing on your rights as a property owner,
It's not your domain.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
There, I don't
think that
want to- Sorry.
that's when you would bring some sort of concern legally to address, you know, directly between you and the perpetrator of the noise, I guess.
Yes, yes.
And I'm, you know, that's not a great answer, but
Mm-hmm.
So I think I don't want to say that, like I said, the way that we pass our ordinances, I think it is worth at least looking to see if we have a similar ordinance to what Bennington has. And if we do, then we should look into whether it's being violated or not. But I don't think that we can at this meeting today say that there's been a violation. So I don't think that we can take an action today, but we can look and see if that ordinance exists. We can if that does exist, we will certainly pursue an investigation to see whether it's been violated or not. And if it does not exist, then we'll let you know, and then you'd need to pursue a private remedy at that point, I think.
Wow. Gosh.
I don't feel it does not seem to me that the board is willing to draft a letter or communicate with the homeowner short of there being a violation. Is that accurate, or am I misinterpreting the board there?
Well, I guess my opinion would be, just like anything else, we have residents who complain about the dogs barking. What we encourage them to do is to contact the police, and the police can at least come up and give their initial version of what they think is, if they feel that there is a violation.
Does anybody really recommend calling the police at this point in history?
So what the police can do is they can take your complaint, and if they feel like it's a warranted complaint, they have the right to approach the property owner to just say there's been a complaint registered. It goes back to, you know, when I remember when I was living in Burlington, if your music was too loud, you would get a knock at the door, and the police would say your music's too loud. There's been complaints by your neighbors. Can you please turn the music down? And I'm pretty sure then it wasn't really a decibel issue or anything else. It was them determining on their own that you were basically being a public nuisance.
Mm-hmm.
So in my opinion, it can't hurt to make that call, and they will tell you whether they can respond to it or not. If they say they flat out won't respond to it, then at least you've tried that avenue as well.
Well, it sounds reasonable in the current atmosphere in the country. I'm a little loath looking the way I do to call the police, I wouldn't mind calling the police if I was accompanied by, if when the police came, I had the presence of someone from, who represents my village, but I'm absolutely not going to call the police.
Okay, and they would, what they would do is they would come and listen to what your complaint is. They would verify by themselves what they're hearing when it was going on. And
I
they
think
would.
you're not
review it.
hearing me. I'm not calling the police.
Okay, I understand, that's completely, yeah, I was just
Yeah.
kind of one of the things, if there are, like, when it comes to dog ordinances and all those things, the only remedy
I
is.
mean, I call the police and hide, is what I'm saying.
I understand what you're saying, and I mean, if you're seriously suggesting that you'd like me or another trustee, I would be happy to come up and talk to the police with,
I would accept that.
but I that's completely up to you. I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable in any way.
No, that would make me feel very comfortable, actually. Calling the police if you were there when.
So what,
Yeah, sorry, Matthew. Was someone?
what time of day does this,
If
when
you
does this happen?
Well, let me see, what day is today? Tuesday. On Friday, it was literally all day, and then it started at noon, and then went on until about 5, and that was a relief. Then at 6 o'clock, it went on until 8:45. That's when I went over and spoke to the mother, and she was very well, anyway, but now they're not there today, and they haven't been there on the or I haven't seen any activity. But the reason I began to contact you is because it was every day, and it would go on for hours, and then it would stop. But as I say, just at the end of the day, when you were particularly needed quiet, that just around now, it would go on, and as if they were having parties. And I mean, again, I don't mind. I love the noise of children playing and so on. But this was this noise of the machines and the shouting, and just on and on. They're boys, but even for boys, they're extremely. Their activities are very irritating. This is not the only thing that they've done. The children have done, but this is the thing that has really pushed me over the edge.
Okay. Well, thank you for bringing this up, and you do have my number if you want to call with me at some point. I'm happy to do that. So we do.
So you look into the audit to see if there's an ordinance that, and you let me know if there is, and if there is an ordinance, do you write to them? Do you?
If there is, it's my recollection that if there is an ordinance, that the trustees are in charge of enforcing the ordinance as opposed to the zoning administrator.
Very well.
That's what I remember from the we had a problem property where there was some zoning violations and then also some ordinance violations, and the zoning administrator is strictly for zoning and the trustees handle
Right.
it.
May I ask how long this will take for you to look into the ordinance?
Well, it's not, it shouldn't take long, but right now I have to see what my comfort level is in going in and looking at the files. I think that's fine, because I don't think too many people use our depot where we keep the files, but I haven't been there since March, so I'll try to do it as soon as I can.
I would very much appreciate it, and thank everybody for your time, for listening to me.
Okay.
Good to see you, Jamaica.
Same
Take
here.
care.
Yes, take care. Bye bye. Now let me see how I get out of this. So leave. Yes, I see a little button that says leave. Thank you.
Okay. And the next order of business tonight is treasurer's report. And if we want to, do you have a brief report, Mary, for us, or
I
would you?
think I sent you the notes, so I don't know that there's anything urgent that needs to be discussed at the moment. Next month, this time next month, when we have all of June's bills in, I think there will be more to discuss with where we are in terms of hitting our year end.
Okay.
So in the interest of time, unless you all had any questions or concerns on the reports, I'll defer.
How about a highway and facilities report?
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. So this is the first time I've done this, so I don't know if I'm doing it right. But pretty much we've, grass season has come. We've opened the fountain. I thought it was something that needed to be done to make people happy around the village. We started our roadside mowing. Should hopefully have that completed by the end of next week without any trouble. Hopefully sooner, but that's where it is. Other than that, we're gonna start ditching and cleaning up, little berms of topsoil and stuff that have grown on the side of the road. I sent a list out today and I went around and looked at probably the most troublesome spots. We're not sure if we can get to that whole list, but I think at one point in time that me and somebody else should go for a ride around and we prioritize those. John brought up another one today, is a little piece of sidewalk in front of the post office. And I think that we can almost do with our backhoe. That's not a big deal. When we have this rented piece of equipment, we need to capitalize on it because it spins 360 degrees and use it to its ability. But that doesn't mean that can't fall into it. Like I put on the Bank Street, stripping the topsoil where you see the old marble sidewalk, and then there's a hump, so the plow's got to work inside a trench, cleaning one side off. I mean, that's not probably a high priority. It's just if we get to do it, that's the machine to do it with. The steps on West and School Street that are not ADA compliant, and taking that sidewalk down to a ground level, and maybe we make a grass sidewalk this year, or we talked about doing a small sidewalk paving project or something. That's very less than the other Bank Street side. You know what I mean? There's it's just a lot cheaper to do, smaller, and that would make that corner a lot handier, especially for us. And again, I don't know if we could never get it ADA compliant because of the hill when you come up School Street. It's got that little hill. I mean, we can't afford to shave the hill and the road and everything else down, but we can make it so it's not a step.
Okay.
It's pretty much it in a nutshell. On the noise ordinance piece, when the second year I was in, when we had this discussion with Mrs. Jones, and it was more motorcycles on the street, I was instructed and given, I was given something by the trustees, and it's probably got an ordinance written on it, and there's 4 signs on every corner of the village. So if you went out to the Madison and Harlan Road intersection, there's a sign there, and I believe, and that has an ordinance number and a decimal level and all that. So the noise side of it, there at least was something in place at one time.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful actually to my search. Appreciate that.
Yeah, it might be easier. I don't know where the rest of it, but
Okay. And Tara reminded me that we do in fact, so we issue an ordinance, and the police can enforce an ordinance if we have one written down. So that we do enforce our own ordinances, but we can do it through a law enforcement agency. So as long as we can point to an actual ordinance that we have. Okay. Great, thank you. There was the, Norm, just one more thing there. You did get a bid on a truck.
I
And
did, through, and I don't know if everybody knows this, but like, Carbone, where we bought the last two, they're not selling Fords anymore.
Okay,
Carmody, Bennington went to Carmody Ford. They honor the state Vermont bid. So, you know, it's all been worked out with the bean counters, for lack of a better term. And, there's a couple little glitches on it, but you know, it's colors and little things, but that is a bid for the truck. I don't necessarily know that we need to do that tonight, but I just wanted people to see it. If they had any questions about it, with Mary, you know what I mean? Because we're not buying it till next year anyway. So,
no, I appreciate you sending it.
or excuse me, not next year, after July.
Right,
But that price is with a plow installed on it. So except for buying a standard, that would be a driveway truck, and there's no trade-in value on that. So then we'll have that to go against that number.
all right, thank you very much.
Norm, quickly, what's the trade-in value you expect with the,
You know, Matt, I haven't even looked at it, but I would say 10 to 15, you know.
that's
You know,
significant.
We have the guy that, Modern Motors that bought the last one. I mean, I sent him the VIN. He runs it and he throws out a wholesale number, and then I'll be able to talk about it. You know, we could just trade it in and be done with it. And that kind of seems it the best way to me, because then we keep it. It's not like the when we bought the big dump truck and we were sweating whether we would have it long enough. You know what I mean? If we just buy it from the dealership, done. You know, we don't have. It's no big deal. We keep driving ours until it's done. But you know, he's got to offer us a number, and we've got to be able to live with that number. You know, and I don't have that yet because again, with COVID, he came out. They took a bunch of pictures, but we're not to that step in the process.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, so, anything from the Development Review Board? Tara, are you vocal now? No, I'm still not getting it. Okay, well, you keep,
I don't think she's on.
you can keep typing to me or to the group if you want, but I will pass on any message that you type to me. Okay, there's no update from DRB, she says. Great. Okay. So the Planning Commission. Oh, sorry. Chris Damon, the zoning administrator, and Tara talked about having an open air meeting. So that's just at the discussion point right now, trying to organize it. Hasn't happened. And there are a couple of, there's just one or two pending issues before the DRB, I think. There's no activity on the Planning Commission right now. I haven't heard anything from the fire department except for they got something like 40 gallons of hand sanitizer and asked me if I needed any. So apparently they're good with that. Water department, we're supposedly wrapping up the Zaluzny project and the water improvement project. We did run into an issue a couple weeks ago with not using trench boxes again. So that was addressed, and I reiterated our position that that's a safety concern. That's a non-starter for the village, that they have to be used, or we're going to issue a stop work order. So I just can't, we can't cut corners like that. It just, even if it's the site manager's, experience that says, oh, for this reason or that, it's okay, that's just not okay with the village. So we're gonna ask that they always use the trench boxes when they're trenching. New business is the rules. So I just wanted to adopt new rules of procedure which conform with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, but model rules. I sent it to the trustees, but we'll do that next month. I don't want to spend the time looking at there's several places where you have a choice. If the trustees between now and July would just take a look at that document at some point, there's several options for us, whether it's, the trustees require like a unanimous consent or a 2/3 in this situation or that situation. And I'm sure we can just approve those pretty quickly, but we don't need to do that tonight. So if we, I would like to ask if I think that the issue that most people are here to discuss is the communication tower proposal for the Bennington College property. I would like to ask if there's any citizen here that is here to comment on another issue or another quick issue that would like to be heard, and then so that we can then spend the rest of the meeting essentially talking about the communications tower. If you would let us know. Otherwise, I'll assume that everyone is here to discuss that matter. I did want to just it wasn't officially on the agenda, but I did publish it in the Front Porch Forum when it was posted. I did want to just make it clear that we did issue a statement last week with regard to the closing temporarily of Lake Perrin, and that Lake Perrin Recreations is a private nonprofit that lies within the village boundary and also in Shaftesbury. But the chair of their board discussed with me and with the trustees their thinking about how to handle some situations that were occurring there. And then a serious event took place last week that, the trustees took a position and issued a public statement on. And so it was, the lake as a result was closed, but it was because the board felt that they could not staff the lake in such a way as to protect everybody's safety. It was not like a punishment. I don't want anyone to feel that way, that that somebody acted badly and so therefore no one can use the lake. That was not the intention at all. It was that they felt that they needed more staff there in order to run things properly, and because of the regulations that are in place, their normal budget doesn't support that kind of staff. And so they're looking at that. They're looking at how the regulations are changing, and they're looking at funding sources, and they're trying to reopen the lake as soon as possible. I know it's hot, and I know people want to use that resource. So it's important that we work in that direction. Certainly the boat access point is still open, and my kids were on the slip and slide today, so hopefully there are some other options to keep cool, but just wanted to address that. So I will, at this point, turn it over. I think, Mr. Dodge, if you have some things prepared for us for this sort of revised proposal. We did have a full proposal last month, so we don't need to go through all the stuff over, but if you could just summarize and also provide us with new information, that'd be great.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. So again, my name is Will Dodge, and I am an attorney at Downs Drackland Martin, and our firm helped to prepare the application. There's a couple of people here that'll be speaking tonight in connection with the application, and that includes Tungui, who is with the Bennington College, Andy Schlater, who works very closely with the college on a number of different development projects, Steve Kelleher, who's the principal of Vertex and is one of the, basically the principal of Vertex, and thus is going to be the party building the tower and then managing it and marketing it to others. And then Janelle Smith, and Jeff Delicali, who are both with Centerline Communications and are responsible for working with AT&T on a number of different projects in Vermont, including this one. So what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, Mr. Chair, is to go ahead and share a screen and do a PowerPoint presentation. I think I might need you to enable screen share in order to do that. Let's see. All these wonderful challenges of our new world.
I think if I make you a co-host, you should be able to do that.
Okay. Let's see if that one now works. Hold on one second. Okay. Hold on one second. Okay, hold on one second. For some reason, okay, sorry, mine's, if you'll bear with me for 1 second. Let's see. Can everyone now see that?
Oops.
Okay, great. I'm going to assume that that's a yes, and if anybody is having trouble, then definitely either send something on the chat or let us know.
Somebody's got a little background, so if you're not,
Well, I think in that call, there was like a whole itinerary when they were talking about things.
Great. So while we're waiting for that, so what I'd like to do is just start by just giving you a description of the new location that we're looking at on the Bennington College campus for the tower. Then talk a little bit about the wireless coverage. Focus third on the visibility of the tower at the new location. Then talk just a little bit about the Section 248 analysis, and then end by essentially returning to where we started, which is a request on the part of the village trustees to issue a recommendation to AT&T and to Vertex, which we can then take to the Vermont Public Utility Commission when we would file the application or petition for certificate of public good, which we anticipate to be sometime in the month of July, once all of our due diligence is 100% complete. And as a reminder too, that recommendation can be a sort of a straight recommendation. Sometimes we do recommendations with conditions. And if that were the case, if the village were to issue a conditional recommendation, we would either try to address that condition head on or explain to the Public Utility Commission why it's not feasible. So with that in mind, again, if you'll bear with me, let's see. So where we left off last time, we had the original location of the project here, much closer to Prospect Street on the Bennington College campus. I sort of kept in the presentation just a reminder that Vertex is a party that builds towers. AT&T is sort of the first carrier or the anchor tenant who would be putting equipment up there to improve AT&T service in the area. Bennington College is obviously our landlord for both Vertex and for the co-locators. So they are working on entering into a lease with Vertex for a tower facility at an appropriate location and with appropriate conditions. Centerline works on basically making arrangements for co-locations or new towers at different sites. And C Squared is a company that did our independent radio frequency analysis. So when we started out, again, we had the compound and access road and utilities that were relatively close to the intersection of College Road and Prospect Street. We heard a lot of feedback and received some written feedback that while there's a general sense in the village that there's need for improvement, that the location was too close to residences. We were concerned at the time, and what we reported last time was, we were concerned about winding up in the middle of the field, but we were willing to look at other locations, provided that we could more or less maintain the same level of coverage that we have from the proposed location. So where did we end up? Well, you'll see that over on the left-hand side is kind of the new location on the campus. It's roughly 600 feet southwest from the original location and between 10 to 20 feet lower in elevation. So looking over on the right, here's that original location that we had based on the coordinates. The new location is much closer, really over to Pleasant Street and further away from Prospect Street. The design is a little bit similar in the sense that the idea is we would still access, or we would still have at least an access that comes off of Prospect Street that more or less follows the existing, what's called the Meadow Trail, and then basically veers in a short distance in order to put together a 50 by 50 compound. The real difference in the compound, all the elements in terms of the antennas, the generator, what's called the walk-in cabinet would be the same. The tower that we're proposing is what we refer to as a matte gray monopole. So instead of a stealth pine tree, we would be proposing a sort of a traditional monopole with a total height of 130 feet. So a little bit taller than what was originally proposed. And part of the reason for that is that a concern that's been expressed by Jim Sullivan and some other folks is that pines are not, don't do well when they extend too far above a canopy. They end up drawing more attention of the eye than a straight monopole. So that's part of the reason that the college and Vertex and AT&T are all proposing to use that design. Utilities for the property would basically extend from an existing pole just across from the Davis Alumni House and go up to the compound. You can see here kind of the topography. It's a little bit, it's certainly lower in elevation than the original location, but it's a little less challenging in terms of not requiring quite as much grading as would have been true for the existing location. Over here, we have the compound, which is essentially the same design as before. You have basically a parking area at the top of it, a gateway to come in, fencing around it, which tends to be about an 8-foot chain link fence. It has anti-climbing device on to keep people out, and within it has room basically to put concrete pads upon which to install equipment shelters or equipment cabinets, emergency generators, tower in the middle, and a meter bank. Now, this picture that I'm showing you is really, we didn't have a good picture because we're going to be deep in the forest, as you'll see from some of the simulations, to show you what a typical monopole looks like. This is an AT&T monopole of 140 feet in Colchester, close to where I live up here in Essex. This one does not have much screening. It's at basically a special services bus depot, but you can get a sense of more or less what a typical monopole and an AT&T array looks like. One of the issues that has, not really an issue, but a comment that we received so far is that we wanted to be sure to show on the plans, this actually came from Jim Sullivan at the Bennington Regional Planning Commission, where the short Aldrich Trail and the Meadow Trail are located in connection or in relation to the facility. And what we were talking about earlier today is the compound is going to be more or less about where my arrow is, right there. So it'll be to the south of that Aldrich Trail. So there'll be an extension down here, and then you'll basically cut into the forest right there just to get to the compound. As with the last proposal, the plan is to only clear what's absolutely required to get in. Steve, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, real quick. So we're not coming from the north down. We're coming up from the south. So I just wanted to make sure you were talking coming from Prospect Street, but that would that would be a non-starter because of the amount of disturbance. But we're coming up, you can see there's a little trail going up south, from the south to the north. That's how we're gonna be coming in there, not down from Prospect Street.
Okay, and that's true for temporary, we don't need the temporary construction access at this point to come through.
No, this will be true for the whole thing, yeah.
Okay, okay, great, great. So that's something that we'll just make sure is very clear on the final zoning drawings that are submitted to the Public Utility Commission. So then we've investigated so far the wetlands on the property. The same Vermont certified wetland scientist, Christine Hines, who looked at the first location, and she basically reached the same conclusion. Mature mixed wood forest and adjacent meadow have no significant swales or depressions. No springs or groundwater seeps were found that might create a pocket of wetland vegetation, and is confirmed that no state wetlands permit or Army Corps permit will be required for the location. We still need to do the rest of the due diligence that's associated with the NEPA process, and that'll be ongoing. But before we really do that, we sort of wanted to get a sense from the village and from folks who are attending, sort of what the reaction to the new location. In terms of wireless coverage, you remember the slide from last time showing where the other adjacent AT&T sites are, combination of Shaftesbury, a couple of different sites in Bennington, including on Mount Anthony, a few sites in Pownell. But really the issue, and this was the propagation map that I showed you last time, the areas that AT&T are trying to cover are really in and around the college itself. It does not have reliable coverage. So you see all of those white spaces around the college are places that need to get filled in. But we're also trying to cover a little bit more of 279, of Bennington College, the length of Bennington College Road, of 7 and 7A, and to some degree 67, and as many of the residential neighborhoods around there as we can. So this was the original coverage that would fill in, just to sort of toggle back and forth between those two. You can see that with the original location, we would have had a lot more green around here, some on 69, more on 279. So in comparing the locations and keeping in mind the difference in height, right? Originally, AT&T's antennas on the first location would have been at 106 feet above ground level. At the proposed location, they're at 126, which is why you get an 130-foot tower. And what you can see is that basically the new site, which is shown here really in sort of a peach color, is more or less overlapping with the original location. There are a few places where the coverage is not quite as good. Like you can see along here, we'll miss a little bit of Bennington College Road, but there's other ways in which this site will make up for that, including along 7 and 7A and parts of 67. So our radio frequency engineers, both at C Squared, who sort of independently look at this, as well as the AT&T engineers themselves, are satisfied that this location will work at this height for what they're looking to do. And bear in mind as well that this site is partially about coverage, but it's also about capacity. That issue when you might have 4 bars on your phone, but you're trying to pull up a website or use an app that is connected to the internet, and everything will be spooling. And the problem there is too many people all using their phones at the same time. So this particular site will also offload traffic. And that's true both for the AT&T commercial customer as well as first responders who are subscribing to FirstNet. So with that in mind, what invariably becomes the most important part of looking at a site is visibility. And what we did was a couple of weeks ago, we did another balloon test looking at this new location from various vantage points. Similar to what we did last time, the balloon was flown at the height of 130 feet, and then photographs were taken from various vantage points in the area. What you'll see is, keep in mind that because of the shift in location, we did not take pictures at exactly the same spots as before. Many of those spots where you could have seen the tower originally in our original presentation, you can no longer see them because of the shift. So the focus of the balloon test was to look for places where you could see it now, or to confirm that you will not be able to see it from this location based on sort of a predictive analysis. what we can show you, the place that we had concern, and of course Bennington College had concern, was on the campus itself. This is photo location 3, so this is on Bennington College Road, basically looking across that field on the campus. You could just barely see the balloon from this location. This is about 1/3 of a mile away. And with the new tower, basically, certainly with leaf-on conditions, it's going to be very difficult to see this site. Number 4, which is further south, basically toward the southernmost point of the campus, you can see here in between the trees, the balloon. Again, this is about 1/3 of a mile away. And with the tower, it becomes very difficult to see, again, with leaf-on conditions. This is probably one of the views that you'll see the tower most clearly. So this is from 15 Church Street, so sort of northwest of the site, looking back. You can see the balloon right here from the playground. There's a depiction of the tower. Now you'll notice that there's 2 levels of antennas on this particular simulation, and that's really just in anticipation, which we believe, which is that it's very likely to get a second co-locator before too long. We don't have an active application right now. There's only AT&T, but it's very likely that T-Mobile or Verizon, or perhaps even both, will ultimately try to co-locate on the tower. This is another location on Corey Drive to the north. Looking back, what I notice about this particular picture is, on the one hand, from this location, the tower is not going to break the ridgeline behind it, which is something that we're always concerned with. The other point about this particular picture is there's a lot of infrastructure in the foreground, so it's not really that it's taking away from any significant view. This is from basically the north side of Lake Perrin on McCarthy Acres. Looking back, this is starting to get close to a mile, so it's harder to see a tower unless you're really looking for it, but there you can see it just popping up a little bit above the trees. This is taken again from about 0.86 of a mile, Lamb Road, also north. Again, very difficult to see, well below that ridge line, so it doesn't break. And from this one, you could barely see it. I'm honestly not sure why this one was taken, but basically this is from Route 67, about a mile away, and showing that if you can see it at all, it's going to very quickly disappear behind the tree canopy in that area. We also documented a number of different places where we confirmed you could not see the balloon. So Water Street, Main Street, 3rd Street, School Street, Mechanic Street, College Road. The guys who do the balloon tests are very good about, if they can see it, they will show it to us. And sometimes it's not terribly flattering when we get the pictures back. But these are all locations where they confirmed basically for most of the way along these streets. Same with these other locations. This is Lake Perrin Road. This is Mountain Road, again on Water Street, North Bennington Road, Madison Road, and also Water Street. So we're feeling very positive that this site is not going to have an undue adverse aesthetic effect in the area. In terms of Section 248A review, just as kind of a reminder, what the Public Utility Commission typically looks for is an analysis of the town plan and the regional plans, as well as any zoning ordinance. And then they want to see, in particular, whether the village trustees in this case, or regional planning commission will make a recommendation based on those plans. I think we talked last time about what's in the town plan and the regional plan, which is essentially a recognition of the need for better communications while also being sensitive to environmental and scenic views. I think the thing that we talked about the most last time was the fact that the village zoning bylaws itself are more or less silent on telecommunications facilities, but analogizing to what's in the town zoning bylaws. Basically, we would meet all except for 2 criteria. First, the height above the trees criteria, and we basically explained that last time, which is to try to make the facility work as it's intended. We can't be only 20 feet above the tree canopy. The other part was the 500-foot setback from residences. And what I can show you here was the original location. And as you can see, looking at concentric circles going, the 500-foot radius for most of the residences in the area, we were definitely closer or within that 500 feet. just even though we were pretty deep in the forest. But at this location, we confirmed that everything on Pleasant Street, everything along Prospect Street, more than 500 feet away. So with that, that's really the extent of our presentation. I'm very happy to answer any questions, and all of the colleagues who are on the call with me, I think would answer questions. The one thing that I would be interested in hearing, or maybe in conveying, is that in this process, the college in particular worked very closely with Mr. Hall, who was one of the more vocal people the last time around. And it's our understanding, it'd be helpful to hear from him that that he is satisfied, at least with this new location. So that's something that we're proud of. This is how AT&T likes to work through these types of issues with communities. And I think with that, we're happy to go into the Q&A and answer any questions and see if the trustees will grant us a recommendation.
So I would ask it again, just to remind people that please do address comments to me, the chair, as opposed to directly to, you can certainly ask any question you want, and you can suggest who the person best suited to respond would be, but just to keep things civil and moving along, we could proceed that way. So go, if you want to either raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask to be recognized, I can proceed that way.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Sure, this is, and would you introduce yourself?
Sure, this is Becky Manning, third. I'd like to know about the lighting for the tower. I appreciate, Mr. Dodge, the thorough description of the project, and I don't have an aesthetic reaction to it, and I'm sure it will be useful to humans, but I'm interested in what the lighting is along the guy wires at the top of the tower.
Sure. So we, as part of this process, we will basically confirm what we know to be true with documentation, which is that because this tower is less than 200 feet, it's not required to be lighted, and we would have no plans to light it. There's a process whereby you always have to check with the FAA to basically let them know that a tower is coming into place. But unless you're basically right on top of an airport, which obviously Bennington College is not, there's virtually no likelihood that this will be lit. I don't know, Steve, have we run the tower already through that process?
Yep, I ran a preliminary tow air. Again, we talked about stuff earlier with the, now that we have the final location, I'll start the FCC notification process. Pending that we get a positive recommendation on the current location and at the current height, and I'll submit that. And then it's about a 21-day turnaround to get. It's just a report that if the report comes back that we may have an impact, and we have to do an extended study with the FAA. But it's like Will said, it's highly unlikely that will require any lighting at the top of the tower.
Okay.
And so the only lighting might be, if you open the door of the the equipment cabinet, it'll have like a sensor light, but
Yeah,
it won't be. It's not like even a light like you might have on your house that'll go off.
Okay, I'm just speaking for another species here. There's 7 million birds, mostly migratory, that are killed by strikes on cell towers. And of course, it depends on the height and the location. Most of those are migratory birds. That's an annual number. It's sort of depressing. And the FAA has approved that if the lights are blinking, as opposed to a solid light, that makes a huge difference. But if you don't need to light it, it's not a problem. So
yes, and no guy wires as well. That's the other thing. This is a self-support tower, so there's no guy anchor.
Right.
So that
right.
should not.
So thank you. You've answered my question.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Hall would like to be recognized. Let's make sure you have sufficient volume, okay? I'm not hearing you very clearly. It's still pretty soft. See if I can do anything there. If you Down by the lower left-hand corner by the mute button, there is a little arrow where you can adjust your audio settings. I don't know if something might be turned down there.
I'm sorry. I'll try to speak up loudly then. I believe in the de minimis requirements, you're allowed to add height to the tower. I think up to 20 feet. Is that correct?
The 248 de minimis process, you cannot add height to a tower. That would still have to go through a limited size and scope process.
And the college, my lease with the college is gonna limit me to the height that we're talking about right now. So even if by regulatory statutes we were allowed to bump it up, my lease with the college won't allow it.
Okay, fair enough. I am pleased that the tower is moving. It's especially good that it's at least 500 feet from all residences, and I'm supportive of the college's move. So that's great. I think there's still some questions. What will the tower be used for primarily? Will it be used for telephone service enhancement for the college and the town? Or is it going to be used for wireless broadband expansion?
So the answer is both. AT&T's service is basically, it's commercial service that, people would go to a phone at an AT&T store and buy. That is the same service, same network that is used for first responders. So, if the Bennington Police Department is subscribing to FirstNet, and I think part of that is going to depend on knowing that there's good service in the area, then their service, their ability to use several of the apps that we talked about last time when I showed the film about FirstNet, that's part of what the tower is used for, but it's simultaneously used for commercial wireless service that could be used by students, residences, businesses, and so forth.
Okay, and that wireless service, when it becomes true 5G multi-spectrum enhanced service, which I think you're going to move towards, is that correct?
Not at this time. In other
Not at
words,
this time.
AT&T right now, I think is thinking closely about its plans for 5G, but there's no immediate plan to roll that out, and certainly not part of this particular application that would be going to the Public Utility Commission.
But the eventual purpose of the tower would be to hold those antennas as well, would it not?
Well, you say those antennas, but really that's a different, the same, different services can be on the same antennas and so forth. I guess I'm not really sure what your question's getting at.
Well, my question is that, as I understand it, when 5G arrives, multiple antennas will be required to serve the town and the college, not just the ones on this tower.
So
I guess
the
go ahead. So,
I am mute here. So the technology advances. The towers are set to accommodate all the tech. So originally there was 2G, which rolled into 3G, which rolled into 4G. They all service multi-band frequencies and spectrums. So that the 5G is a technology layer that's added to the current infrastructure. So will there be antenna swaps potentially that can handle the 5G installations? Most likely, just as there was antenna additions for 4G. In this case, there's AT&T almost on all their sites are adding antenna for the FirstNet system. So as each technology goes, and then someday there'll be a 6G and a 7G, the towers are there to accommodate the technology of the time.
Yeah, maybe I'm not making my question clear. If 5G is provided, will it be able to serve the college and the town from this one location? or will multiple antennas be required throughout the town and throughout the campus?
Well, it's already, I think, Mr. Hall, it's already true that multiple sites, each with multiple antennas, are required to build a wireless network. That's been true since 1996, right?
Yes.
So the only question would be, all right, if what you're saying is, does this somehow become obsolete? I would say no. This really becomes like a pillar around which potentially other applications are built. So there may be, for instance, some of the smaller antennas that would go, what are called small cell antennas, which are almost like repeaters in different locations, but it's much too soon to tell. It may be that once this site goes up, other than sort of standard upgrades, there are no additional sites that are going to be built in this area. It's impossible to know really until you see what happens with how many people subscribe, how many people continue to use their phones, and for what.
The
Why don't-
reason,
Why don't we take one more question, Mr. Hall, and then I'm gonna allow some other people to jump in there.
I'm happy to cede the,
Okay, so why don't, if there are other questions, I'd like to just, get around the table here before we have follow-ups, so. Yes, Mr. Crowell.
Hi, my name is Hugh Cole. I have a question about the radio, if there's been any study into the radio frequency interference that these towers are going to provide. We have a small radio telescope on the Bennington College campus, and I am concerned about what sort of RF interference might come for that. We work mostly at 1.4 gigahertz, and so I'm just curious if there's been a study of sort of RF interference and to what extent that might impact what we do there.
So I think and maybe I'll let Steve chime in too, but generally speaking, unless we're putting a tower very close to an existing transmitter receiver or another tower, we don't run what's called an intermodulation study. But with that said, the lease between Bennington College and Vertex, I'm quite certain is going to have a clause that deals with how to rectify unreasonable interference should that occur. Normally, because the FCC regulates the different bands of where everything is, it's very unlikely that there would be interference. But I think the way that this typically gets addressed in the real world when it happens is through the lease agreement, because the last thing that anybody wants is to be interfering with someone else and have that issue somehow escalate to the FCC, or worse, just affect everyone's service.
May I answer that question also? And I have designed RF systems for T-Mobile for the last 20 years, and I can talk to some degrees of interference. And Will is correct that all these devices are regulated by the FCC when they transmit and when they receive. And they're designed with bypass filters in them so that when you go beyond a certain modulated scheme, then you're cut off and filtered out. And on the transmitting side, on the receiving side, they do the same thing. So on the high band and the low band, they filter out. So anything that's inside your transmitted allowable bands are permitted to be transmitted. I would suspect that if there is any leakage on the outside, there are so many permutation of devices out there today that I don't believe that all the possible RF devices are being tested. But because the FCC has regulations on the amount of power that can leak outside of their transmitted bands, that you can feel pretty comfortable that if there are interference amongst them, that one of the devices, if the transmitter or receiver is not operating correctly, and we can address that. And I'm responsible for consulting for the college on the leasing side and on the engineering side. And we have an interference clause in there that obligates the transmitting anchor tenant, namely in this case AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and Vertex, to be responsible and be responsive when these issues are detected to help and try to mitigate the problems. But I think the FCC has pretty strong controls inside technically how to address these issues that I don't believe these are major issues. I've operated T-Mobile system across the nation, and the kinds of interference you're referring to, whether it's laboratories for on top of mountains or radio astronomy and so on, it's not something that we have experienced.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yes, Attorney Buckley.
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions and a suggestion. And I'm here on behalf of my mother, Mary Feidner. I'm very happy to see the new location. I think it's a vast improvement over the old. It takes into account and consideration the nearby neighbors. So I'm glad to see that. I do have some concerns about the simulations that you've done thus far. Number one, I don't see any leaf off condition simulations. Typically, when you do a view shed or a view analysis or simulation, you would want to include leaf off conditions. I would suggest that the trustees would want to see something like that. You also want to take into account any clearing that's done for the tower. I don't see that that has been taken into account either in the presentation thus far. So I would suggest that those things should be included and that the trustees should have an opportunity to see those as well as the citizens of the village. I would also suggest that if there are concerns about the tower height and potential increase in any kind of antennas on the tower, that be made a condition of any village trustee approval, that the tower height not be increased, and that there be a limit on the number of antennas that would be placed on the tower. And finally, the last point I would like to raise and suggest that the trustees consider is whether or not there is a demolition plan that would be included within the application for the PUC. I know that is definitely something that has to be included, certainly when you're talking about wind towers and other infrastructures. And I don't know is that the applicant has included that. I didn't see that in the original materials that were filed. So I would suggest that the village trustees make sure that that also is addressed.
Mr. Chair, just briefly on the last point, part of my lease agreement with the college requires us to post a removal bond. The wording basically says that to the extent that the local municipality doesn't require it, then the college is going to require it. And so that portion will be, and if the board wants to make that recommendation, then we're doing it anyways. So we can have that be the town as the obligee or the village as the obligee under the bonds.
Take with, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Follow up?
Just one quick follow-up. I heard a couple of times that the lease with the college would require certain things. What I'm suggesting is that the trustees should make those conditions of your approval or signing off on this. That way you have control as opposed to it being a contractual lease arrangement directly between Vertex and the college. It would give you some authority and some ability to have a say in this and control over what happens in the future.
Right, and we wouldn't object to that. So I agree with that sentiment.
What I would say about your comments, and we take what you said, and I think the college has already addressed the height concern, is that trying to limit the antennas is very difficult because it makes it difficult to encourage co-location, which is something that the town in all of its planning documents and the regional plan as well encourage. There are natural, but there are physical limits to any tower of how much equipment you can put on that. And that's determined both in terms of the structural capacity as well as principles like interference, not having antennas more than 10 or less than 10 feet apart from one another. So I feel like you could achieve what you're concerned about on the height increase, but trying to limit the number of antennas potentially makes the tower less marketable and thus less doing what it's intended to do, which is to make sure that there's competition among multiple carriers for good service
in this area of Bennington.
I have to say, I think that in reading some of the requirements, even of these small projects, it does require co-location when possible. It's my understanding, and so I wouldn't want to limit the ability to co-locate to, I wouldn't want to prevent co-location and have another tower on, on private or public property when there could have just been one. But I certainly take your point, though, that, we want to consider each part of the agreement between the college and the tower and the college and AT&T and make sure that if there's parts of that we find favorable, that we make those conditions as well, so that we have some skin in the game there too. Is there anybody that has not been able to speak yet that would like to ask a question? Okay, is there, Mr. Hall, do you have a follow-up?
I do. I just would like to point out to the trustees that there are some signature locations in our village which were not included within the visual simulation section. The Mile Round Woods approach, I would think you'd be able to see the tower from there. Park McCullough House, all along the adjacent street to the Park McCullough House, I would think you'd be able to see the tower from there. And you should be aware of that, and that was not illustrated. Also, I'm a little bit surprised that no photographs were taken from the orchard area of the college, but that's up to the college. I believe those are historically valuable properties, and I don't know whether or not the tower can be seen from them or whether it matters to the college, but there are certain areas of the village that you may wish to see the impact.
Thank you for that. I definitely think that the picture from the school showed, very clear line of sight of the tower, and that's what it would look like. So I think that, when you're balancing aesthetics and the need for mobile communication, I think there's definitely going to be locations where you're going to see the tower. But I do think that it's important to, like you're saying, the historic site, you do want to recognize that that's going to be the case there. But Mr. Schlatter, did you have any response to that, or?
Yeah, I do. I was going to jump in. So I'm Andy Schlatter, Vice President of Facilities Management and Planning at the college. And I think there might be a little interference there, Mike. But as far as the college is concerned, we did carefully look at the visual impact of the proposed tower on college property as well. The previous location actually was slightly less visible from our campus, from the main campus, than the new location is. The new location is visible when you are in the northwest corner of campus only, which is kind of, for those of you who are familiar with the campus, when you're moving beyond the Jennings Music Building towards the orchard, on a section of road there, you can see the tower above the tree line in that location. But given the need on campus and in the community for improved communication and the alternative sites that we looked at, this seemed like the sort of the least damaging visually, but the most effective in terms of getting the coverage that we need. So we've reviewed it with the trustees of the college, and they've approved the new location. We did vet it carefully that way.
Are there other questions from trustees?
Okay,
All right. Any follow-ups? Okay, I want to make sure people have an opportunity. But I also don't want to, keep us longer than, yes, Mr.
So I actually one of the things, it does sound like this site will not be lit, which as an astronomer at Bennington College, I fully support. And so what I would say is that perhaps, I don't know that is something that needs to be made a condition of this, but I would hope that if the decision were to be made that for whatever reason, if the FAA comes back and says it needs to be lit, that would be disappointing. And I hope that there will be further discussion. So that's all I just wanted to say.
Would Mr. Bowie be able to speak to that, or Mr. Schlatter?
Not to the lighting issue, as
I
far as I'm aware.
Yeah,
as
go ahead,
Mr.
Andy.
stated, the height of the tower doesn't require lighting.
I think we should know, Mr. Chair, I would say that we're gonna know the answer to that in a relatively short period of time. And if it's helpful to the trustees, we could provide that before we even file the petition. In other words, a confirmation that no lighting is required. And if it turns out that lighting is required, then I think we're gonna be, as far as we're concerned, that is, at least has the potential to be a substantial change and thus might require more process as part of the permitting.
One thing that we
We're-
could
we're-
do also,
We're
if I may
quite confident.
suggest, we let the zoning process, approval process go as is. And then we can put in as a condition of approval in the lease that this tower cannot be lighted. And if it is lighted, then we can have a private discussion with the board of trustees of the college, if this is something that's worthwhile for us to pursue or not. But the understanding today is that lighting is not allowed per the lease with the college.
Good.
So I guess, I can look at this, we can look at this independently, but so long as everybody's here, I may just mention it. If the trustees add that as part of a condition that say, our support is contingent on it being unlighted, does that, I wonder if it is lit, whether that triggers it to come back to us to see if we can get a different support, or whether it just means that we don't support it.
I think the way that procedurally, oh, sorry, go ahead, Tony, if you like.
Yeah. My suggestion is to leave it within the board of trustees with the college so that the college can weigh it from the leasing standpoint. I mean, if from the leasing standpoint, it's a private transaction and we have greater control from the college standpoint than to have to go through a review process and zoning process. It's more complicated because there's certain process you have to follow. But if it's just a private conversation, the college can shut down the lease in a moment's notice if a violation has been caused. But if you let it through the process with zoning or CUP, it may take a lot longer. And I'm comfortable putting in, making sure, see if you can tell me if you would oppose this or not. But I just don't feel from the years I've been doing this that this is the location that would require lighting. And I don't want to see Andromeda being, all blocked out by this blinking light here. So I certainly support that, but I just don't see. I would say 99% chance is not lighting is going to be required for this tower.
right, and I probably, and Will can maybe speak to it, I think just from a practical standpoint, to limit, I think it's better suited in the lease in this case because of the Telecommunications Act. I don't know that you can condition of approval based off of FCC governed lighting requirements. And I'm not saying that I'm agreeing to the concept of no lighting, but I don't think an approval based off of that would be valid. So it's almost better to allow it to go through the leasing with the college because it's in there anyways. So, but and Will can speak to it better than I on the TCA side, but I do think that poses some problems.
It might. What I would say though is that if we were to make the affirmative representation in the PUC proceeding that the tower will not be lit and we show our tower, that if for some reason down the road, the FCC were to change its mind and require us to light this, even though Morse is 2.5 miles to the south of this particular tower, then at that point, that would be something upon which the village would be able to go back to the PUC and say, hey, wait a minute.
Right, and
That's
the other, right, and the other thing that, if the college decided to put a helicopter landing pad on the campus, or airport was suddenly approved nearby 10 years from now, that shouldn't fall back on us as the tower owner. So there are things, if you put a strict, who's to say what will happen 10 years from now, 20 years from now, that are out of our control, that would require the tower to be lit because airport was, approved across the way. But for purposes of the discussion on the initial approval, I'm not arguing for it, because I typically shy away from towers that would need to be lit anyways, because it's just a hassle. So I wouldn't be looking to build it if it was lit initially.
Yeah, Hugh, I'm thinking that if it turns out that for some reason in the future, say 10, 20 years from now, that lighting is required, I mean, there are different kinds of lighting, different kinds of sodium lighting and things like that that we can use also. I don't want to just say that if there's lighting required, the tower goes down and the town loses coverage that it's accustomed to for the past 20 years. So I think that to give us more latitude, leaving it with the leasing side and allow us to discuss as a community gives us better control than to involve the court system or the regulatory system to decide. And I think some parts of it is right. There's federal preemption that said if there are some things that a decision cannot be made locally based on health reasons is one of those, and anything that's been preempted by the federal government. And if the FCC or the FAA has control over certain areas and we make decisions based on those, it looks like we're preempting the federal government, and I'm not sure that's something that we can do. You'd have to look into that for us, but I think that from a leasing standpoint, it gives us full control. But if we start to venture outside of that, it puts the project at risk.
Yes, I would say all of that's true, but I think that the most important thing that we could do, just as a practical matter, is to get you the tower if this location is approved, to basically demonstrate that as it stands here right now, and not knowing what kind of vehicle we're all going to be flying 25 years from now. At the moment, we shouldn't need any type of lighting.
Yeah, I did a preliminary tower on it. So, but what I do is I send it out to this company called Federal Airways and Airspace. They're out of Florida. This is all they do. So I'll send the coordinates out to them tomorrow with the tower height at 130. There's usually a lightning rod that's 4 or 5 feet on top. So they run it at 135 feet, just total obstruction. I should have it back in anywhere from 14 to 20 days.
Great. All right, thank you. Any further? Yes, Mr. Hall.
I would just bring up the 60 days advance notice. Is that still ticking? Because the trustees should know when they need to respond by.
It is, and it's just to be clear, it's not our intention to be filing on day 61 with the PUC. I think we still have some more due diligence to do, as I mentioned, on the NEPA side and on finalizing some of the plans and so forth. But what we typically like is to get a recommendation from the municipality, in this case, the village, so that we have that by the end of the 60-day period. And then basically, once we file the petition with the PUC, then the town, the Regional Planning Commission, and all adjoiners will have the right within a 30-day comment period to send in comments or to decide to actually intervene in the case to the PUC. Once that 30 days is up, then typically the PUC looks at what's come in and will make a decision. Again, part of the reason why this 60-day process is so important is because the PUC likes to see that we've engaged with the community and that we've solicited feedback, so that is thoughtfully incorporated into the petition that we file with them and that's reviewed by the other state agencies.
Okay. Well, I guess it would be my understanding that the trustees would decide whether or not we wanted to support the project, give our conditional support or not object to the project. I think that might be an option as well. And I guess I'll take comment from the other trustees as to whether we're ready to make a decision this evening or at a motion, or whether you would prefer additional time, or if there's something else that you need in order to make a decision.
John, I would just like to clarify a few things about to what degree we really do have anything to say about this. I know that, so we're talking about a tower on private property that's in a, by the bull here. And in addition to that, you have the FCC and you have federal regulations that are, I think, pretty strong about this. We're all talking about how we have some say in this, and I would like maybe Mr. Dodge and maybe Ms. Bupley to speak to, I guess, the reality of what input we as trustees have with regard to this project.
Yeah, so at least, and again, keeping in mind that I'm the attorney for Vertex and AT&T here, so you may want to discuss it with some others. But what I would say is that input accounts for a lot. The way that 248A C2, which is one of the sort of the three provisions in the statute that has a criteria that the Public Utility Commission has to decide, says that that the commission must afford substantial deference to the recommendations of the municipality where the proposed project is located, and that unless the applicant can show good cause, in other words, some type of technical or legal reason why those recommendations should not be adhered to, then the project gets denied. So it is important. It's important for the village to think through what it wants to see and to articulate that in a recommendation letter. But as far as we're concerned, that is a critical part of the whole entire process. And frankly, that's the reason why we felt that 248A works very well overall, is precisely because it solicits and gets input from different communities, from Grand Isle down into Windham County and over into Bennington County. Multiple projects that we've worked on. We've undergone a very similar process and have found that it works best when we get a recommendation from the municipality.
And I just want to add, I think hopefully, whenever we're doing these, to the extent possible, we try to work with the landowner and then the community. We listen to Mr. Hall's concerns. Obviously, the college had a big say in that, and we're obviously willing to make adjustments to address the concerns that we've heard, and we continue to do so to the extent it's possible. There may be some things that are asked or talked about that we just can't do, but to the extent that we can do something, we're willing to listen and work with the community to these are long-term relationships. The tower is going to be there 40 years, 50 years. So, the college has been there long before that. So I know that that's a concern for them, and everyone wants to just make sure that we're kind of putting our best foot forward here because it's a long-term project.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add to respond to Mr. Patterson's questions and add to what Mr. Dodge said. There is this, you as the trustees have a statutory role to play basically in the review process by the PUC. And so you are authorized by the statute to have that role, not just to recommend or recommend with conditions or not recommend or take no action, but you can make specific requests. There are some questions about whether or not, if a light were required on top of the tower, say if it was, 50 feet higher. if, and yes, there are federal requirements that come into play, but you can certainly make your desires and your wishes known in the form of conditions of approval. So that is absolutely within your authority and your purview to do that.
Thanks, Liz. Appreciate it.
Any other questions? Trustee questions? All right, I see, I mean, the questions really that have been raised to my mind, had to do with interference and visibility, height, the number of antennas and the demolition. I think the demolition and the number of antennas, I think we've addressed to my satisfaction, but is there a reason for the trustees to further consider based on the visual or height considerations? Do we need additional information or additional time to make a decision on that? Or is there a motion that someone would like to make?
So I'm not really sure if there would be a motion to be made, but I mean, I'm very satisfied with both the line of questioning and the answers given. I would be prepared right now to make a decision as a whole.
Okay,
John, because I work for the college, I'm not gonna participate in this decision right now, so.
okay,
I still feel comfortable.
all right. And so would you be abstaining from a vote, or are you asking for time to consider whether?
I'm just gonna abstain from the vote.
Okay. So of the, there are 4 trustees that would be making the decision at this time. Is there someone who would like to make a motion on whether to either support, not object, conditional support, or object to the proposed project?
So I have I guess another question. This gets back to the issue about the power of the and how, really what happens after this tower is in place. And I think I'm echoing some of Mr. Hall's concerns that, so now the tower's in place, and we have shifts in, technologies or needs or, demands of the community or of the corporations putting up the towers. What happens then? So I can be fine, I guess, with the current proposal. And I think we've heard kind of, some answers that don't fully satisfy me about, what happens in the future. So, does our support, if conditional, change in any way what happens 10 years from now with respect to, the further needs, further heights, different frequencies, higher power, all the things that we've seen happen over the course of the last 20 years of this technology. In general, I think that the idea of having touch for the communication needs of the community and of the college makes a lot of sense to me. But I also, having been involved with the tower on Mount Anthony, have seen how that has morphed into something very different than it was in 1997 when we initially allowed that tower to occur. And I think it gets back for me a little bit more about what say we really have, you know, 5, 8, 10 years from now, with how that tower is utilized by the by the company that currently owns it, but the tower that I'm involved with has now been owned by 7 different companies in the last 20 years. And that adds a whole nother dimension to all that. But
Well, I think our active role is limited at that point. However, any kind of, the statute does try to make sure that any significant change is cause to revisit the issues. I think that only de minimis changes would be permitted, and probably even some of the de minimis changes would be addressed in the private contract. But I think as far, and I'm just responding from my own personal perspective as well, Matt. I'm not, trying to say that I know any better than you do, but it seems that I'm not concerned that, they're going to add another 30 feet on the tower later on, or that it's going to be substantially different, because I do think that would trigger that they could propose that, but that it would require review again.
and is that do you know where that is in the statutes or in the contract? Because I'm
can't.
not so certain.
So,
Okay. Well,
Mr. Chair, can I respond briefly? Or Jung, you want to go ahead?
Mr. Boyd.
Contract, from the contract, we state that every application on the tower must meet the requirements of local and state and federal codes. So if there's another wireless carrier coming in wanting to install antennas, so they have to have a permit for that. And if that permit is not present, they're not allowed to add additional antennas on there. That's just in a contract with Vertex. And so that's the component of the contract that I can add to your question.
And what I would just add to that is that in terms of how the approval process works with the PUC, every time there is a change to the antennas that increases the footprint of what's there today or what's been approved by past permits, then that it will go to the PUC under the de minimis modification, and it has to be de minimis. It will go to the trustees. In other words, the trustees gets notified of every one of those applications and has 30 days to object if they think, wait a minute, something's not right. So, Mr. Patterson, I'm familiar with the tower that you're talking about on Mount Anthony. There's 2 towers, one that's regulated, which is the AT&T tower that's there, and one that's wholly unregulated, which is, I think, the one that you're talking about. And you're right, that one is a terrible mess. And I think that precisely because it didn't go through a procedure like 248A, that's why it's just, it's unruly, I guess would be the word that I would use to describe it. It's not what we would envision would happen here, and especially because this is under the guise of 248A.
So the only condition really that I'm looking at, and as far as my decision, would be the height. So it's a higher height proposal, but from a lower, the elevation is lower, so they're proposing that it be higher. But I'm just curious. I don't know if, from the college's perspective, I assume that you'd want the lowest possible tower that they would let you do. But I didn't see any. I saw the overlapping study between the 2 different locations, but I don't know if there is a possibility of any way to overlay different, how reduced does the coverage get as you lower the tower, and you know, at what point does it get to be unacceptable, and are we kind of like at the minimum, or are we somewhere in the middle? And I guess that would be my only concern here. Yeah. Is there
There are some gray areas in that. Now, you remember there is an application by Verizon on Mechanic Street. And
Yes.
so while we build this tower, we want to make sure that Verizon takes interest in this at 120 feet. And then I know that also T-Mobile is interested. Also, have spoken with US Cellular, and there are 4 wireless carriers interested in here. What we want to do is to build a tower so that they all 4 can fit in there nicely, as opposed to requiring them to build yet another tower nearby because this one tower cannot support it. So the whole idea behind this is to make it fit so that there's not a proliferation of towers around town. And I think this design achieves that also.
So does that change? So there was a picture from the school playground, and does that change the image that you would see, like from that picture to 2 arrays of antenna to 4, if there are 4 or there's AT&T plus 3 co-locators? I mean, they're just going to be at 10-foot intervals right down the tower. Is that correct?
Yeah, if in fact all 4 of them were to come, then that would be the maximum. But I think that as we design it today, I think 3 carriers was probably the maximum that's been designed for this particular site here. Number 4 potentially, but then you'll be at the tree canopy to where it's not as meaningful for the last carrier to come on.
Okay. And I guess that's really the crux of the problem there, is because obviously from an aesthetic point of view, you'd want it just below the tree line, but from the carrier point of view, that's useless, basically.
It's still line of sight technology at the end of the day. So
Yeah.
you really can't be in the canopy.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that as far as I'm concerned, I know that it's not usually the way to go is to have the chair make motions, but just for the use of the other trustees, I think that as far as I'm concerned, I would be willing to grant conditional support to this project with basically the conditions that we were talking about, that it that were mentioned, that it not be higher than the height that was mentioned, that it I think one thing that I would want to make sure is clear is that there's not an access road from Prospect Street, because I think that did significantly alter the road that was discussed from the other location just was on college property. But if I wouldn't want there's never been anything to suggest that a new road was going to be put onto Prospect Street. So
No, and I'll clarify that was just a mental moment for me in showing that based on the yellow line, but it is very much just coming up from, bear with me for 1 second. I can put the back on the slide. It's really just the road that's coming from the orchard up and over to the compound.
it wouldn't extend past.
Wouldn't extend from Prospect Street south. It's just basically from on campus to this section.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I feel comfortable with the representations that have been made here tonight. But I think it is more proper to have somebody else make the motion.
I'm happy to make that motion, John.
Okay, so Mr. Boudreau, is your motion to grant conditional support to the project as proposed tonight, and we would draft a letter of support?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second? And Tara Lowry is seconding the motion. Okay, thank you. And of the four trustees that are present, without with the one abstention, all those in favor of the motion, please indicate by either letting me know by wave of your hand or thumbs up, okay, or saying aye. And am in favor. Mr. Patterson?
Excuse me, John. Matthew just lost all internet and everything at his house. But he is voting aye, if that's okay. He just texted me. He's trying to get back on.
Okay, well, oh, here he goes. That was just a glitch. That wasn't.
He said his whole house. I don't know.
Okay, so Matt, the motion has been made to grant conditional support to the project, and it's been voted by Tara, myself, and Mark affirmatively. Do you have a position on that motion?
Well, I guess I do. The whole house just went out for the last few minutes. Don't have any connection, as you might have noticed, but I think I can vote in the affirmative for that.
Okay. All right, so the motion carries, and we will issue a letter of conditional support for this project. And I think, you know, as trustees, you know, we recognize the competing interests here and where we live and the aesthetics of where we live and the importance of that, as well as the reality that people need this kind of service and that it's essential to people's daily lives more and more, that people rely on this for a lot of aspects of their daily lives and businesses. So we appreciate the thoroughness of the presentations, and also I really want to thank the college for being so proactive and helping us make this important decision and be partners with us on this, and really coming from the same perspective and in almost every way. So I appreciate that.
Hey, John, I'd also like to mention, you know, the appreciation of community members that were put the time and effort into attending the meeting, speaking up, researching. It's always nice to see our community speak up.
Absolutely. I mean, we can't do this without you as and your input. Otherwise, we don't, you know, we are only speaking on our own behalf. But okay,
Thanks, Mark, for that.
And just on behalf of our team, we really appreciate the time and the effort and the attention that everybody has put into this. It's really great. You know, a wonderful thing about doing this in multiple communities around Vermont is to discover how many wonderful communities there are. And this is certainly one of them. So we really do appreciate the letter and look forward to continuing to communicate.
okay, thank you very much. And we'll say goodnight to the folks that were here for that issue. So thank you for being here.
Good night. Thanks to everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
We have, if there are other is there other issues for the good of the order before we go to a brief executive session to discuss a contractual issue? And we need to discuss a pay issue as well. That's or a salary issue.
John, I have one thing just under old business for parks.
Yeah.
We had a few months back given approval to allowing the rec center to run some programming on Welling Field.
Yes.
And obviously, given everything that's going on, that kind of fell by the wayside. I sent an email saying they are still interested in doing that. And I just said I would bring it up. I don't know where we fall in terms of opening up our public space.
Are they looking at Lake Perrin too? This was, I mean, they're at Lake Perrin, but the other, is that part of it?
No, this is just the rec center running youth programming, I think, for like K to second graders. Just feel they would put up some tents as temporary buildings for the couple of weeks they're gonna run programming. I did ask them to provide what they're doing and how they're following state guidelines to make sure they're following all the public use guidelines. And I haven't heard back on that yet, but are we, I mean, I guess are we just following what state guidance is for that?
Is that, were you communicating with Kayla Becker?
No, it was actually Taylor, who is the head of the programming. Taylor,
Okay.
losing her last name, but
It seemed like it's the same thing though. Maybe not.
yeah, but I know we made it. I mean, we helped the Rex, or not the Rex, Lake Perrin kind of supported them in closing because of their issues. I mean, we certainly have the right to say we're not going to, you know, we made a decision on Lions Park that, you know, we felt like it was okay to open it up for certain things and maybe not others. So I just want to make sure that that's kind of our feeling for that too. My initial feeling is yes, as long as they're following all the guidelines the state is putting out there. But I wanted to make sure, I certainly don't want to speak for everyone else.
And and that there's adequate supervision and everything too. I mean, it's not,
Yeah, I mean, it's the rec center's programming, so they have,
yeah.
through the YMCA, so they have to follow all the, you know, adult to student or adult to child ratios and all those things, but
Yeah.
My biggest concern was the number of kids they're going to have and they're paying attention to the social distancing and all those other things, but if they are following, which I assume they would be, if she contacts me back and says, yes, we are following all the state guidance on everything, then I would be in support of letting them still use the space.
I think it would be good to have that in writing. I think it'd be good to have
Sure.
a letter from the trustees to say that, you know, the conditional support, you know,
Yeah.
we're granting a lot of conditional support tonight, but our conditional support of this is that all state guidelines are being followed.
Okay. I immediately replied back and I haven't heard in over a week. So I'll just say that I did mention it on our meeting and that initially we are still willing to, as long as, you know, like you said, as long as we get something in writing that shows you are following all state guidance in terms of public space use. I'll then not make a decision then either. I'll either email around and see what we feel then.
Well, I don't think I think that's within the discretion of the committees to allow use of public space. That's not something we need to have a motion and a vote on or anything, but
Okay.
I think our position is clear that we do need to have those regulations followed though.
Okay. And I would obviously, as a courtesy, just give you guys a heads up on what came through, but okay. Thank you.
There's no porta potty, but there's no porta potty over there or anything, is there? Is
No,
that-
that's the other thing they've got to decide. I mean, if they're doing something, depending on the amount of time they're there and what they might have to, I don't know if they'd have to put one in, but I'll mention that to them. There is
Yeah.
Yep. No, thank you. I didn't even think of that. That was it.
Okay, thank you. So I think what we'll do is we're gonna move into an executive session and then we will come back into the open session, but just to close the meeting. So anybody who is tuning in online or for Cat TV, we wouldn't have to have you come back after the executive session. We're just gonna close the meeting at that point.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So is there a motion for executive session?
So moved.
And a second?
A
Miss
second.
Kenny is seconding, and all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye.